The morning sun cast a golden glow over London as the city awakened to a day that would be etched in the memories of thousands. Westminster Abbey stood majestically against the clear blue sky, its ancient stones holding centuries of history within their walls. Today it would witness another chapter in the ongoing story of Britain's royal family. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere was filled with quiet anticipation. Kate Middleton stood before an elegant mirror in her dressing room, her reflection showing a woman who had grown from a shy university student into one of the world's most photographed and admired figures. Her stylist carefully adjusted the hem of her coat dress, a stunning creation in royal blue that spoke of both tradition and modern elegance. The fabric caught the light beautifully, and the cut was impeccable, flattering without being ostentatious. Prince William was in the adjacent room, straightening his tie for what seemed like the 100th time. Despite years of public appearances, he still felt that familiar flutter of nerves before major events. His private secretary briefed him on the schedule, but William's mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about his children and how they would handle the day ahead. Public appearances were never easy, especially for young ones who would rather be playing in the garden or reading their favorite books. Down the hallway, Princess Charlotte was having her hair brushed by her nanny. The young princess sat remarkably still, a trait that often surprised those who spent time with her. She wore a navy dress with a white collar, her outfit carefully chosen to complement her mother's attire without overshadowing it. Charlotte had inherited her mother's poise and her father's sense of duty, though she was still just a child learning to navigate the complex world of royal protocol. Prince George, the eldest of the 3 children, was already dressed and waiting in the drawing room. His suit was tailored perfectly, making him look like a miniature version of his father. He held a book in his hands, though he wasn't really reading it. His eyes kept drifting to the window, watching the security teams making their final preparations. George understood more than most people realized about his position and what was expected of him. He carried the weight of being second in line to the throne with a maturity that sometimes worried his parents. Prince Louis, the youngest, was the wild card of the morning. At his age, sitting still was a challenge, and the formal clothes felt restrictive. His nanny had already redirected his energy 3 times, once catching him just before he slid down the grand staircase banister. Louis had his mother's smile and his father's mischievous streak, a combination that both delighted and occasionally exasperated his family. Kate finished her preparations and walked to the children's rooms. She checked on each of them, offering words of encouragement and making small adjustments to their outfits. Her touch was gentle but purposeful. She straightened George's collar, smoothed Charlotte's dress, and managed to convince Louis to keep his shoes on for at least the next few minutes. These small maternal gestures grounded her, reminding her that beneath all the ceremony and public attention, she was simply a mother preparing her children for an important day. William joined his family in the entrance hall. He looked at Kate and smiled. A private moment of connection between 2 people who had learned to support each other through the unique pressures of royal life. They exchanged a glance that spoke volumes without words. They were ready, or at least as ready as anyone could be for such occasions. The convoy of vehicles waited outside. Security personnel had checked and rechecked every detail. The route to Westminster Abbey had been cleared and secured. Crowds were already gathering along the streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Some had been waiting since dawn, armed with flags, cameras, and sandwiches, determined to secure the best viewing spots. As the family prepared to depart, a final briefing took place. The children were reminded about protocol, about walking at a measured pace, about where to look and when to wave. Charlotte listened intently, asking a clarifying question that impressed the staff with its thoughtfulness. George nodded silently, his expression serious. Louis fidgeted but seemed to understand that this was important. Kate bent down to Louis's level, speaking softly to him. She had a way of connecting with her children that made even the most formal occasions feel manageable. She reminded him that she would be right beside him, that he could hold her hand if he felt nervous, and that he was going to do wonderfully. Louis's face relaxed, and he gave his mother a quick hug. The family moved toward the door. William took a deep breath, placed his hand on George's shoulder for a moment, then offered his arm to Kate. She took it gracefully, and together they stepped out into the morning light. The children followed, Charlotte between her brothers, all 3 walking with a dignity that seemed beyond their years. The vehicles waited, sleek and imposing. Staff members opened doors and the family settled inside. Through the tinted windows they could see the palace grounds, the gardens where they had played countless times, now seeming distant as they prepared to enter their public roles once again. As the convoy began to move, Kate looked at her children. George stared straight ahead, already in his public mode. Charlotte watched the scenery pass with interest, pointing out things to Louis, who was surprisingly calm now that they were actually moving. Kate felt a surge of pride mixed with the protective instinct that never quite left her. No matter how many times they did this, the journey to Westminster Abbey would take only minutes, but in that brief time, the family transitioned from their private selves to the public figures the world expected to see. William squeezed Kate's hand and she returned the gesture. They were in this together. Always had been, always would be. London streets were lined with well-wishers. As the convoy passed, people waved and cheered. Some held up their children for a better view, wanting them to remember this day. The excitement was palpable, a wave of affection and curiosity that followed the royal family wherever they went. Inside the vehicle, the children's earlier nervousness was giving way to something else. They were rising to the occasion, preparing to step into their roles with the grace that had been instilled in them since birth. The moment they had been preparing for all morning was almost here, and Westminster Abbey awaited their arrival. The convoy slowed as it approached Westminster Abbey, and through the windows the family could see the massive crowds that had gathered. Barriers held back hundreds of people, all craning their necks for a glimpse of the royal family. Cameras flashed continuously, creating a storm of light that would have been overwhelming if they hadn't grown somewhat accustomed to it over the years. Westminster Abbey rose before them, its Gothic architecture a testament to nearly 1,000 years of English history. The twin towers reached toward the sky, and the intricate stonework seemed to tell stories of kings and queens, of coronations and weddings, of moments that had shaped a nation. Today it would add another memory to its collection. The vehicles came to a smooth stop at the designated entrance. Outside, a carefully choreographed reception awaited. Church officials stood in their ceremonial robes, members of the military in dress uniforms, and palace staff positioned precisely where they needed to be. Everyone had a role to play in this elaborately staged moment. William stepped out first as protocol demanded. He paused for just a second, allowing the photographers their moment, then turned to assist Kate. She emerged with practiced grace, her coat dress catching the breeze slightly, her hair perfectly in place despite the wind. She smiled, that warm, genuine smile that had won hearts around the world, and the crowd's cheers grew louder. Then came the children. George stepped out next, his young face composed and serious. He had been coached on where to look, how to stand, when to smile. But there was something authentically him in the way he carried himself. He wasn't just following instructions. He was genuinely trying to do his best, to honor the responsibilities that came with his birth. Charlotte followed, and as she emerged, there was an audible reaction from the crowd. She was naturally photogenic, with an ease in front of cameras that seemed instinctive rather than learned. She took in the scene with bright eyes, smiled at the right moments, and stayed close to her mother as she had been taught. There was a confidence in her bearing that suggested she understood the moment without being overwhelmed by it. Louis was the last to exit the vehicle, and his appearance brought a different energy to the proceedings. He looked around with unconcealed curiosity, his eyes wide as he took in the crowds, the flags, the magnificent building before them. For a moment it seemed he might wave enthusiastically or call out, but Kate's gentle hand on his shoulder steadied him. He remembered his instructions and composed himself, though his natural exuberance was barely contained beneath the surface. The family gathered together at the base of the steps leading into the abbey. This was a moment the photographers had been waiting for, and they seized it with enthusiasm. Cameras clicked in a continuous rhythm, capturing every angle, every expression, every small interaction between family members. Years from now, people would look at these images and remember this day, this moment, this family. William surveyed his small group with visible pride. Kate caught his eye, and they shared a look that acknowledged the strangeness and the beauty of their situation. Here they were, a family like any other in many ways, yet standing in front of one of the world's most iconic buildings, surrounded by ceremony and tradition, watched by millions. An official approached and spoke quietly to William, indicating it was time to proceed. The family began their walk toward the Abbey entrance. Their pace was measured, neither rushed nor artificially slow. George walked beside his father, mimicking his stride. Charlotte stayed close to Kate, her hand occasionally reaching for her mother's. Louis walked between his parents, one small hand in his father's, the other in his mother's, anchored by their presence. The path to the entrance had been lined with military personnel standing at attention. As the family passed, there was a profound sense of respect in the air. These were men and women who had dedicated their lives to service, and they recognized in this family a different but equally significant form of duty. Some of the younger service members couldn't help but sneak glances at the children, perhaps thinking of their own families at home. The Abbey's entrance loomed larger with each step. The ancient wooden doors stood open, revealing the breathtaking interior beyond. Light streamed through stained glass windows, creating patterns of color on the stone floor. The space was vast, designed to inspire awe and reverence, and it succeeded magnificently. As they reached the threshold, the family paused briefly. This wasn't in the official program, but William and Kate had learned that sometimes the most meaningful moments were the unscripted ones. They looked back at the crowd one more time, offering final waves and smiles. The people responded with renewed cheering, a wave of affection that washed over the royal family. Charlotte tugged slightly on her mother's hand, asking a question too quiet for anyone else to hear. Kate bent down slightly, answered with a smile, and Charlotte nodded, satisfied. These small exchanges, invisible to cameras but crucial to the family's functioning, were what kept them grounded. George glanced up at the Abbey's soaring ceiling as they entered, his serious expression breaking for just a moment into one of wonder. He had been here before, of course, but the building's grandeur never failed to impress. The history contained within these walls was part of his own history, his own story that was still being written. Louis, despite his earlier composure, couldn't quite contain a small gasp as they entered. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior, and his young mind struggled to comprehend the scale of it all. Kate squeezed his hand reassuringly, reminding him without words that she was there, that he was safe, that he could be amazed without being afraid. Inside, more people waited. These were the important guests, the dignitaries and officials who had been invited to attend. They stood as the royal family entered, a show of respect that was both formal and genuine. Many of them had watched George, Charlotte, and Louis grow up through photographs and news reports. Seeing them in person, seeing how they had matured and how they conducted themselves, brought smiles to many faces. The Abbey's acoustics amplified every sound. Footsteps echoed on ancient stone, whispers carried farther than intended, and the rustle of formal clothing created a symphony of small noises. An organ played softly, its notes filling the space with a sense of solemnity and occasion. William guided his family down the aisle, aware of the eyes upon them but focused on moving forward with dignity. Kate maintained her graceful bearing, her years of experience evident in every movement. The children stayed close, their training serving them well, but also genuinely engaged with the moment rather than just going through the motions. They passed monuments to long-dead kings and queens, poets and scientists, warriors and statesmen. Westminster Abbey was a chronicle of British achievement and sacrifice, and the children were walking through chapters of history that they would one day study in school. The irony wasn't lost on William and Kate, whose own lives would likely be commemorated in similar ways generations hence. As they progressed deeper into the Abbey, the light changed, becoming more subdued but somehow more reverent. The stained glass windows told biblical stories and honored historical figures, their colors muted by age but still beautiful. The stone walls had witnessed coronations and funerals, weddings and state occasions, moments of triumph and tragedy. The family reached their designated position, a spot carefully marked and prepared. They arranged themselves as rehearsed, standing together as a unit while maintaining proper protocol. George stood tall, Charlotte remained poised, and Louis, remarkably, was still holding himself together admirably. This entrance, this walk through Westminster Abbey, was more than just a public appearance. It was a statement of continuity, a reminder that the monarchy persisted across generations. It was a family fulfilling their duty while trying to remain authentic to themselves. It was history being made in real time, another page being written in a very old book. The ceremony inside Westminster Abbey unfolded with the precision that came from centuries of tradition. Every element had been planned, every moment choreographed, yet there remained space for genuine human connection. William and Kate had learned, over the years, how to balance the demands of protocol with the authenticity that people responded to and appreciated. George stood between his parents, his posture straight and his expression attentive. He listened to the speakers with apparent interest, though occasionally his eyes would wander to the architectural details above him. The vaulted ceiling stretched, impossibly high, and the intricate carving seemed to hold secrets from ages past. He was at an age where he understood his future role, but was still allowed to be curious about the world around him. Charlotte demonstrated remarkable focus for someone her age. She watched everything with keen interest, her observant nature evident in the way she took in details others might miss. When hymns were sung, her lips moved along with the words, having practiced them at home. She represented a new generation of royals, one that could honor tradition while bringing fresh perspective. Louis, the youngest, faced the greatest challenge. Sitting still for extended periods went against every instinct of childhood. His legs swung occasionally, and he shifted in his seat more frequently than his siblings. Kate noticed each movement and would place a gentle hand on his knee, or lean down to whisper something encouraging. William, too, kept an eye on his youngest son, ready to provide support if needed. They both remembered being young themselves, understanding that asking a child to sit through a lengthy formal ceremony required patience and understanding from everyone involved. The abbey was filled with notable figures from various walks of life. Politicians sat near religious leaders, military officers beside cultural ambassadors. The gathering represented the breadth of British society, all brought together for this occasion. Many of them glanced toward the royal family, particularly the children, with expressions ranging from curiosity to admiration to nostalgia for their own youngsters at home. Kate maintained her composed exterior while remaining completely attuned to her children's needs. She had perfected the art of appearing relaxed while being constantly vigilant. Her eyes would flicker to each child in turn, checking for signs of discomfort or restlessness. When Charlotte needed reassurance, Kate provided it with a smile. When George seemed lost in thought, she allowed him that space. When Louis fidgeted, she redirected him gently. The speakers at the ceremony addressed themes of duty, service, and national unity. Their words echoed through the ancient space, given extra weight by the setting. William listened intently, occasionally nodding at particularly resonant points. These weren't just abstract concepts for him. They were the principles by which he tried to live his life and raise his children. He wanted George, Charlotte, and Louis to understand that their privilege came with responsibility. Between formal segments of the ceremony, there were brief moments of relative informality. During one such moment, Charlotte leaned toward her mother and whispered a question. Kate's response made Charlotte smile, a genuine expression of childhood, wonder that briefly broke through the formality of the occasion. These glimpses of normal family interaction, when captured by cameras, would become some of the most beloved images of the day. George maintained his serious demeanor throughout most of the ceremony, perhaps feeling the weight of being the oldest and needing to set an example. But when a particularly beautiful piece of music was performed, his face softened with appreciation. He had inherited his grandmother's love of music, and moments like these reminded everyone that beneath the titles and expectations was a young boy with his own interests and passions. Louis provided the most unpredictable moments, as youngest children often do. At one point, he noticed something interesting in the stained glass window and pointed it out to his father with enthusiasm that required gentle shushing. William handled it perfectly, acknowledging what Louis had seen while redirecting his attention back to the ceremony. The exchange was brief but revealed the warmth between father and son. The lighting inside the abbey shifted as clouds moved across the sun outside. Shafts of colored light from the stained glass windows created moving patterns across the congregation. The effect was mesmerizing, adding an ethereal quality to the already impressive atmosphere. Charlotte seemed particularly captivated by this display, watching how the colors changed and moved. As the ceremony progressed, There were readings from historical texts and contemporary works. Some spoke of the past, honoring those who had come before. Others looked to the future, expressing hope for the generations to come. For William and Kate, these words carried special meaning. They were raising the future of the monarchy while trying to keep their children's childhood as normal as possible within extraordinary circumstances. The Abbey's choir performed several pieces, their voices rising to fill every corner of the vast space. The acoustics were perfect, carrying the music as it had for centuries. Louis seemed particularly affected by the singing, his restlessness diminishing as he listened. Music had a way of transcending age and formality, speaking to something universal in human experience. Dignitaries from around the world had sent representatives or attended personally. They watched the British royal family with varying degrees of interest and understanding. Some came from nations with their own monarchies and recognized the familiar dynamics of royal life. Others came from republics and viewed the proceedings with curiosity tinged with historical perspective. All of them noted how the children conducted themselves, understanding that they were witnessing the preparation of future leaders. Kate's mind drifted occasionally to practical concerns. Was Louis getting too tired? Would Charlotte need a restroom break soon? Had George remembered to eat enough breakfast to sustain him through the long morning? These mundane maternal worries coexisted with her public role, a duality that had become second nature to her over the years. William glanced at his watch subtly, mentally calculating how much longer the ceremony would last and how his children were holding up. He felt immense pride in how well they were doing, but he also knew from experience that young patience had limits. He and Kate had discussed contingency plans if any of the children needed to step out briefly, though they hoped it wouldn't be necessary. The ceremony included moments of silence for reflection. During these pauses, the only sounds were the distant hum of London traffic outside and the occasional cough or rustle from the congregation. These quiet moments were almost harder for the children than the active portions. With nothing to focus their attention on, restlessness could creep in more easily. Charlotte used one moment of silence to study the memorial stones beneath her feet. The floor of Westminster Abbey was paved with tributes to notable figures from British history. She was standing on centuries of stories, each stone marking a life of significance. Though she couldn't fully comprehend the historical weight of this, she sensed the importance of where she stood. As the ceremony moved toward its conclusion, there was a palpable sense of collective relief mixed with satisfaction. It had gone well, without major incidents or disruptions. The children had exceeded expectations, demonstrating maturity and grace. William and Kate exchanged a look of mutual acknowledgement and gratitude. They had prepared their children well, but the children themselves deserved credit for their remarkable composure. The final hymn began, and the congregation rose to their feet. The royal family stood together, a unified presence amid the crowd. Their voices joined with hundreds of others, creating a powerful sound that seemed to make the ancient walls vibrate. George sang with surprising confidence. Charlotte's clear voice carried well, and even Louis attempted to follow along, though he didn't know all the words. As the last notes faded, there was a moment of stillness, a collective breath before the ceremony officially concluded. In that brief pause, the significance of what had just transpired settled over everyone present. They had been part of something larger than themselves, a continuation of tradition that stretched back through the centuries and would extend into the future through children like George, Charlotte, and Louis. The ceremony concluded with formal benedictions and final words from church officials. As the last echoes faded into the vaulted ceiling, there was a collective sense of completion and accomplishment. The royal family prepared for their departure, which would be as carefully orchestrated as their arrival, though now with the added challenge of tired children who had held their composure admirably for an extended period. William placed a hand on George's shoulder, a gesture of both pride and reassurance. George looked up at his father with an expression that seemed to ask if he had done well. William's answering smile confirmed what the young prince needed to know. Charlotte reached for her mother's hand instinctively, the formal portions over allowing her to seek comfort more openly. Louis, who had been remarkably patient by his standards, now showed signs that his reserves of stillness were depleted. The family rose from their positions and began the processional walk back down the Abbey's main aisle. This departure carried a different energy than their entrance. The anticipation was replaced with fulfillment, the nervousness with relief. Yet they remained aware of the cameras, the watching eyes, the need to maintain dignity even as the official proceedings ended. As they walked, dignitaries and guests stood out of respect. Many faces showed appreciation for the family's presence and the children's exceptional behavior. Some smiled warmly at Louis, perhaps recognizing in his barely contained energy the universal challenge of keeping young children still during important events. Charlotte walked with renewed confidence, her earlier nervousness completely gone now that she had successfully navigated the ceremony. The Abbey's interior seemed different on the return journey. Perhaps it was the relief of having completed their duties, or maybe the changing light as the sun moved across the sky. But the space felt less imposing and more welcoming. George noticed details he had missed during their entrance, his curious nature reasserting itself now that the most formal portions were complete. As they approached the exit, the sound of the crowd outside grew audible. The cheers and excitement had not diminished during their time inside. If anything, the anticipation had built. People had been waiting patiently for another glimpse of the family, and particularly the children, whose public appearances were relatively rare and therefore especially treasured by royal watchers. Kate paused just inside the doorway, taking a moment to check on each child one final time before they stepped back into the public eye. She smoothed Charlotte's dress, adjusted Louis's collar, and shared a quick word with George. These maternal touches were automatic, performed with the muscle memory of someone who had done them countless times before. William watched his wife with appreciation, grateful for her steady presence and intuitive understanding of what their children needed. Stepping out of Westminster Abbey was like entering a different world. The relative quiet and controlled atmosphere inside gave way to the vibrant energy of the crowd outside. The sun seemed brighter, the colors more vivid, the sounds more immediate. Louis blinked in the sudden light, and Charlotte instinctively moved closer to her mother, not from fear but from the instinct to stay connected amid the sensory shift. The crowd erupted into cheers as the royal family emerged. Flags waved, cameras flashed, and voices called out greetings and congratulations. The family paused at the top of the steps, allowing the photographers their moment and acknowledging the people who had waited so patiently. William waved with practiced ease, while Kate's smile was warm and genuine. The children waved too, George with careful deliberation, Charlotte with natural grace, and Louis with enthusiastic energy that brought laughter from onlookers. The walk down the Abbey steps required careful attention. The stone stairs were ancient and worn, and the formal shoes the children wore were not designed for comfort or easy movement. Kate kept a close watch on Louis, ready to steady him if needed. William guided George, his hand hovering protectively near his eldest son's back. Charlotte navigated the steps with surprising confidence, her sense of balance and spatial awareness serving her well. At the base of the steps, palace officials waited with final instructions and updates. The vehicles were ready, the route secured, and the schedule maintained despite the complexity of the event. Everything had proceeded smoothly, a testament to the thorough planning and the professionalism of everyone involved. But it was also a tribute to the royal family themselves, who had carried out their duties with grace and authenticity. Before entering the vehicles, there was an unexpected moment that would become one of the day's most memorable images. Louis spotted something in the crowd, perhaps a child waving a flag with particular enthusiasm or a sign that caught his attention. He pointed it out to Charlotte, who looked and then smiled. George, noticing his siblings' interaction, glanced over as well. For just a few seconds, the three children were simply young siblings sharing a moment of interest, their formal roles temporarily forgotten. Kate noticed the interaction and chose not to interrupt it. These glimpses of sibling connection were precious, and she had learned that the most authentic moments often happened when protocols loosened slightly. William saw it too and felt a surge of warmth. His children were handling their unique circumstances with remarkable grace, but they were also maintaining the bonds that would support them throughout their lives. The family began moving toward their vehicles, the children falling into formation naturally. The crowd pressed against the barriers, everyone wanting a closer look, a better photograph, a chance to be part of the memory of this day. Security personnel maintained order while trying not to dampen the enthusiasm of the well-wishers. It was a delicate balance, one they had practiced many times. As they walked, William and Kate made eye contact with as many people as possible. They understood the importance of these moments of connection, however brief. For the individuals in the crowd, making eye contact with a member of the royal family could become a cherished memory. For William and Kate, it was a reminder of the real people who supported their family and the institution they represented. Charlotte noticed a young girl in the crowd who was wearing a dress remarkably similar to her own. The girl was waving enthusiastically, her face lit up with excitement. Charlotte smiled at her specifically, a moment of connection between two children whose lives were vastly different but who shared the universal language of childhood. The girl's reaction, captured by nearby cameras, showed pure joy and disbelief that the princess had noticed her. George maintained his composed demeanor but couldn't completely hide a small smile when he heard someone in the crowd call his name with particular enthusiasm. He was learning to navigate the strange reality of being simultaneously a public figure and a private person. The skills he was developing now would serve him throughout his life. But the challenge of finding balance would never entirely disappear. Louis, despite his fatigue, waved energetically at the crowd, his natural exuberance breaking through the formality. His uninhibited enthusiasm charmed onlookers and reminded everyone that beneath the titles and protocols were real children experiencing genuine emotions. Kate gently guided him toward the vehicle, knowing he needed rest but appreciating his ability to connect with people so naturally. The family reached their vehicles, and the staff moved efficiently to assist them. Car doors opened smoothly, and the interior offered a brief sanctuary from the public eye. George climbed in first, followed by Charlotte, then Louis, who was beginning to show signs of the toll the morning had taken on his energy. William ensured the children were settled before helping Kate, then taking his own seat. Through the tinted windows, they could still see the crowd, but the glass created a buffer, a transition space between public and private. The children relaxed visibly, their formal postures easing as they sank into the comfortable seats. Charlotte leaned against her mother, not from distress but from the simple comfort of physical closeness after maintaining proper distance during the ceremony. The vehicles began to move, slowly at first to allow the crowds one final look, then gradually increasing speed as they pulled away from Westminster Abbey. The iconic building receded in the rear windows, its Gothic towers standing as they had for centuries, witnessing yet another moment in the ongoing story of Britain's royal family. Inside the vehicle, the family of five allowed themselves to truly relax, the demands of the public appearance giving way to the simpler dynamics of a family, completing a challenging task together. The convoy moved through London's streets at a measured pace, allowing the crowds lining the route to see the royal family one more time. Inside the lead vehicle, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically from the formal tension of the morning. Louis kicked off his uncomfortable shoes within seconds of the doors closing, drawing a tired laugh from his mother. Charlotte rested her head against Kate's arm, the adrenaline of the public appearance giving way to exhaustion. George sat upright still, but his shoulders had dropped from their rigid position, relief evident in his posture. William loosened his tie slightly, a small gesture of returning to normalcy. He looked at Kate with an expression that communicated volumes without words. They had done it again, navigated another major public appearance successfully, kept their children safe and composed, fulfilled their duties while trying to preserve their humanity. It was a constant balancing act, one that required them to be simultaneously authentic and controlled. Relatable yet royal. Kate's hand stroked Charlotte's hair absently, a soothing motion that required no thought. Her mind was already moving ahead to the rest of the day. The children would need lunch and rest. There would be staff to thank, schedules to review, and the inevitable analysis of how the event had gone. But for these few minutes in the vehicle, she allowed herself to simply be a mother with her children, grateful that they had handled everything so beautifully. George stared out the window watching London pass by. The crowds continued to wave, their enthusiasm undiminished despite having waited for hours. He was old enough to understand that these people felt connected to his family in ways that were both wonderful and occasionally overwhelming. They cared about the royal family, celebrated their appearances, and invested emotional energy in following their lives. It was a responsibility he was gradually learning to comprehend. The route back to Kensington Palace took them through some of London's most iconic areas. They passed landmarks that tourists traveled thousands of miles to see, buildings that appeared in countless photographs and films, streets that had witnessed centuries of history. For the children, these were familiar sights, part of their everyday landscape, yet they carried significance that even young minds could appreciate. Louis had recovered some energy and was chattering to Charlotte about something he had noticed during the ceremony. His voice, no longer restricted by the need for quiet, carried his natural enthusiasm. Charlotte responded with patience, her own tiredness not diminishing her affection for her little brother. Their interaction was utterly normal, the kind of sibling conversation that happened in families everywhere, a reminder that despite their unique circumstances, they were fundamentally just children. William's phone buzzed with messages from palace staff providing initial feedback about the event. Early reports suggested everything had been well received, the photographs were excellent, and the public response was overwhelmingly positive. He scrolled through the updates with one eye while keeping the other on his family, never fully disconnecting from his primary role as father and husband. Regardless of his public duties, Kate noticed a particularly enthusiastic group of schoolchildren waving British flags with wild energy. She pointed them out to her own children, who perked up at seeing other young people. There was something affirming about seeing children their own age excited about the royal family, even if the children in the vehicle couldn't fully participate in normal childhood, in the ways those schoolchildren could. The vehicle slowed as it navigated a particularly crowded section of street. The security team was cautious, never rushing even when the press of people made some occupants nervous. William trusted his security completely, having worked with many of them for years. They understood the delicate balance between keeping the family safe and allowing them to maintain some connection with the public. George asked his father a question about something he had heard during the ceremony, a query that showed he had been paying close attention despite the formality and length of the proceedings. William answered thoughtfully, using the opportunity to help his son understand the broader context of their family's role. These teaching moments happened naturally, woven into everyday conversations, helping prepare George for responsibilities that were still years away, but would arrive inevitably. Charlotte had grown quiet, not from distress but from the contemplative mood that sometimes overtook her. She was processing the experience, mentally reviewing what had happened, how she had performed, what she had learned. Even at her young age, she possessed a reflective quality that would serve her well throughout life. Kate recognized this mood in her daughter, having experienced similar feelings herself after major public events. As they approached Kensington Palace, the crowds thinned somewhat, though dedicated royal watchers remained stationed at viewing points they knew the family would pass. Some of these individuals were familiar faces, people who attended nearly every royal event, whose dedication bordered on the remarkable. The family had come to recognize some of them, these constants in their public life who showed up regardless of weather or inconvenience. Louis had grown sleepy. The combination of early rising nervous energy, extended stillness, and the gentle motion of the vehicle working together to pull him toward a nap. He fought it with the determination children show when they don't want to miss anything, but his eyelids grew heavy despite his best efforts. William noticed and smiled, remembering similar struggles with staying awake from his own childhood. The palace gates came into view, a welcome sight that signaled the approaching return to privacy. The crowds outside the palace were thick, people hoping for one final glimpse as the family returned home. The vehicles slowed to allow these patient supporters their moment, and the family obliged with final waves, conscious of the dedication it took for people to wait for hours just to see them for seconds. Kate thought about the photographs that would appear in newspapers and online within hours. She had long ago learned not to obsess over how she and her family were portrayed, but she couldn't help hoping the images would capture not just the formality, but also the genuine connection between family members. The public responded most warmly to authenticity, to those moments when the royal family seemed most human and relatable. George straightened his posture again as they approached the final stretch, some instinct telling him to maintain dignity until they were completely out of public view. This awareness of presentation, of knowing when he was being watched and adjusting accordingly, was something he had developed early, It was both a valuable skill and occasionally a burden for one so young. The gates opened smoothly, and the vehicles passed through, security personnel ensuring no unauthorized access. The transition from public to private space was marked clearly by these gates, a boundary that protected the family's home life, while acknowledging that complete privacy was a luxury they could rarely enjoy. Even within palace walls, staff members, security teams, and various officials meant that true solitude was elusive. As the vehicle came to a final stop in the private courtyard, there was a collective exhale. They were home. The public appearance was complete. The children could relax fully now, could shed the layers of formality and protocol that, while second nature, still required conscious effort to maintain. Staff waited to greet them, ready to assist with coats and shoes and to ensure everyone had what they needed. Louis was now fully asleep, his head resting against Charlotte's shoulder in a pose that was both touching and slightly awkward. William carefully unbuckled his youngest son, preparing to carry him inside. Charlotte straightened carefully, not wanting to wake her brother but also eager to exit the confines of the vehicle. George waited patiently for everyone else to disembark first, his natural courtesy evident even in small gestures. Kate stepped out first, immediately greeted by her private secretary with updates and questions that couldn't wait. She handled them efficiently while keeping one eye on her children, the multitasking that defined so much of her life. William emerged with Louis in his arms, the sleeping child's vulnerability a stark contrast to the formal young prince who had walked into Westminster Abbey hours earlier. The family gathered briefly in the courtyard before heading inside. Staff members approached with congratulations and practical necessities, water bottles and messages that needed immediate attention. The formality of the morning gave way to the organized chaos of palace life, which had its own protocols but felt infinitely more relaxed than public appearances. Charlotte took her mother's hand as they walked toward the palace entrance, no longer needing to worry about cameras or proper spacing. George walked alongside his father, asking questions about what happens next, his curiosity about the mechanics of royal life insatiable. They passed through doorways that led from public to private spaces, each threshold marking a return to the family life they maintained within these historic walls. Inside, the palace enveloped them with familiar comfort. Here they could be themselves more fully, could let down guards that necessarily remained up in public. The children could run if they wanted, could speak at normal volumes, could simply be young people rather than representatives of an institution. The relief of this privacy was palpable even as the afternoon settled over Kensington Palace with a quietness that contrasted sharply with the morning's pageantry. William had carried Louis to his room, where the exhausted prince remained asleep, still wearing his formal trousers though his jacket had been carefully removed. Kate checked on him periodically, tucking the blanket around his small form and brushing hair from his forehead with tender attention. In the private sitting room, Charlotte had changed into comfortable clothes and was curled up on a sofa with a book. Though her eyes weren't really focusing on the pages, she was still processing the morning, replaying moments in her mind. Kate sat beside her daughter, not pressing for conversation but available if Charlotte wanted to talk. These quiet moments of connection were precious, allowing the children to decompress without pressure or expectation. George had retreated to his room initially but emerged after changing clothes, seeking out his father. He found William in his study, reviewing messages and responding to official communications. George knocked politely before entering, and William immediately set aside his work, giving his son complete attention. The boy had questions about the ceremony, about the people they had seen, about what certain gestures and words had meant. William answered patiently, appreciating his son's curiosity and desire to understand the world he was being prepared to someday lead. The conversation between father and son ranged widely. They discussed history and tradition, duty and service, the weight of expectation and the importance of remaining true to oneself, despite external pressures. William spoke to his son with honesty, not sugarcoating the challenges while also emphasizing the opportunities their position provided. George listened intently, sometimes asking follow-up questions that revealed a thoughtful mind grappling with complex concepts. Kate eventually joined them, bringing tea and sandwiches that the children had barely touched at lunch. She settled into a chair, contributing to the conversation occasionally but mainly content to observe this bonding between father and son. These were the moments that mattered most, the private interactions that would shape George's character more than any public appearance or official duty. The palace staff moved quietly through the hallways, giving the family privacy while attending to their various responsibilities. There were reports to compile about the morning's event, photographs to review, social media responses to monitor, and schedules to coordinate for upcoming engagements. The machinery of royal life continued even as the family took time to rest and recover. Charlotte eventually abandoned her book and wandered to her parents, climbing onto the sofa beside her mother. She asked if she had done everything correctly during the ceremony, a question that revealed lingering uncertainty despite her composed performance. Kate assured her she had been perfect, but more importantly, she emphasized that Charlotte's worth wasn't determined by flawless performance, but by her effort and genuine self. These lessons in self-worth were crucial, given the scrutiny the children would face throughout their lives. As the afternoon progressed, Louis woke from his nap refreshed and energetic. He burst into the sitting room with typical enthusiasm, immediately launching into a description of something funny he had noticed during the ceremony, but hadn't been able to mention at the time. His siblings and parents laughed at his animated retelling, the formal morning already becoming family lore, a shared experience they would reference and remember. William's phone continued to buzz periodically with updates and messages. The media coverage had been overwhelmingly positive, focusing particularly on the children's remarkable behavior and the obvious warmth between family members. Photographs from the day were already circulating globally, being analyzed and admired by millions. William shared some of the kinder comments with Kate, both of them grateful that this particular event had been well received. The family gathered for an early dinner in their private dining room, a space where they could relax completely. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from the morning's events to ordinary topics like homework, upcoming activities, and weekend plans. This normalcy, this ability to shift from public figures to regular family, was something William and Kate had worked hard to cultivate. Their children needed to understand their unique position, while also experiencing as much ordinary childhood as circumstances allowed. George mentioned a school project he was working on, and Charlotte talked about a play she was hoping to try out for. Louis described a game he wanted to play in the garden. These ordinary concerns of childhood coexisted with the extraordinary reality of their morning at Westminster Abbey, creating a life that was simultaneously exceptional and mundane. After dinner, the family spent time together in the private living area. William read to Louis from a favorite book, their voices a quiet murmur in the comfortable room. Charlotte worked on a drawing at a nearby table, occasionally showing her mother progress on the detailed picture she was creating. George sat with Kate, discussing a book he was reading for school, their conversation touching on themes and characters with an earnestness that made Kate's heart swell with pride. As evening approached, the children began their bedtime routines. Baths were drawn, pajamas selected, teeth brushed. These mundane rituals of family life provided structure and normalcy, anchoring the children in regular rhythms despite the irregular nature of their public responsibilities. Kate moved between rooms, supervising and assisting as needed, while William wrapped up final work obligations before joining in the bedtime process. In Louis's room, William tucked his youngest son into bed, listening to the boys' prayers and answering questions about everything from dinosaurs to whether they would have pancakes for breakfast. Louis's ability to move seamlessly between profound experiences and everyday concerns was remarkable, a resilience that would serve him well as he grew older. Charlotte required less hands-on assistance at bedtime, but still appreciated her mother's presence. They talked quietly about the day, about school, about plans for the week ahead. Kate braided her daughter's hair for sleep, the repetitive motion soothing for both of them. Charlotte mentioned feeling proud of how she had handled the morning, and Kate reinforced that pride while reminding her that their family's love was unconditional, not dependent on public performance. George was the last to settle, his active mind making sleep elusive. William sat with him in the dimmed room, their conversation continuing in hushed tones. They talked about leadership and responsibility, about finding balance between duty and personal happiness, about the importance of having trustworthy people around you. These conversations were preparing George for his future role, but they were also simply a father sharing wisdom with his son. Eventually, all three children slept, their exhaustion from the day's events overcoming any resistance to bedtime. William and Kate met in their own sitting room, finally having time alone together. They reviewed the day, sharing observations and feelings they hadn't been able to express earlier. Kate mentioned concerns about the pressure on the children, while William reassured her that they were handling it remarkably well. They discussed upcoming events and how to continue balancing public duties with private family time. The palace grew quiet as night settled over London. Outside the gates, a few dedicated royal watchers remained, hoping for a final glimpse of lights in windows or movement in the courtyard. Inside, the family of five slept peacefully, their successful navigation of another public appearance complete. In the days that followed, the photographs and videos from Westminster Abbey would be shared millions of times. The image of the family entering the Abbey, dignified and united, would grace magazine covers and news websites. Commentators would analyze every detail, from the children's clothing choices to their body language. But for William, Kate, George, Charlotte, and Louis, the morning would be remembered not for the public spectacle, but for the private moments of connection and support. The experience had reinforced important lessons for all of them. For George, it confirmed his ability to handle the responsibilities that would someday be his. For Charlotte, it built confidence in her capacity to navigate public life with grace. For Louis, it demonstrated that he could rise to occasions when needed, even when it required patience beyond his years. For William and Kate, it affirmed their parenting approach, their efforts to prepare their children while preserving their childhood. As the next day dawned over London, life continued for the royal family. There were school lessons to complete, activities to attend, new obligations to prepare for. The Westminster Abbey appearance would fade into memory, one of countless public events that would mark their lives. But it had served its purpose, demonstrating continuity, inspiring the public, and allowing the nation to see the future of the monarchy growing up with dignity and authenticity. The children would continue to develop, to learn, to occasionally stumble and recover. They would face scrutiny and pressure that most children never experience, but they would also have opportunities for service and impact that were equally rare. William and Kate would continue their work of preparing their children for extraordinary futures while fighting to preserve normal presence. The cycle would continue, as it had for generations. Public appearances would be planned,